I'm a 23-year-old female, but this story starts years ago, back when I was in high school. Let me just preface this by saying two things. Number one, this is definitely going to be a long read. And two, I'm what you would consider a hardcore Christian. So, I definitely believe that if there's a good side, there's an evil side too. So, I share the bed with my younger brother, and we were fast asleep one night when I suddenly woke up and saw a humanoid figure at the foot of my bed. It looked like a shadow, except it wasn't. It was at least 6.5 to 7 feet tall, had long black hair, with long limbs and fingernails. Although, I did not see its eyes. I felt it staring at me, and for some reason, I did not feel threatened by it. After looking at it for about 30 seconds, I went back to sleep. I realized in the morning what I had seen the previous night, and completely freaked out. I thought this would be the last of it, but little did I know that I would see it for a total of 3 more times after that. Fast forward to when I moved to India to study dentistry. 3 of us shared a dorm room. One night, I woke up and saw the same humanoid figure at the very foot of my point. Same thing happened. I looked at the figure, went right back to bed. A couple of months later, I met a friend of mine, let's call him D, outside my dorm, and after speaking for a couple of moments, we decided to go back to our dorms. It was getting late. For some reason, I decided to turn around, and that's when I saw the figure again, almost walking next to my friend. Of course, at that time, I didn't think anything of it, because it was quite dark and I assumed a mutual friend of ours, let's call this friend J, had joined D. I got back to my room and texted D and said, "Hey, why didn't J come say hi?" Assuming he was there all the time and purposefully did not say hi. He texted back saying, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I just saw Jay walking with you back to the dorm." And what he texted back haunted me for the longest time. I was alone. I didn't come with anyone, and neither did I walk back with anybody. This was the first time I had seen it when I was awake. A few months later, I was on an 8-hour bus ride with Jay, traveling to different towns to meet up with some of my friends. And that's when I saw it again. The bus had berths instead of seats. They're basically like beds. The figure just sat there, facing away from me, but then quickly turned its head when I noticed it. Needless to say, it freaked me out and I was inconsolable that night, until I finally fell asleep. I spoke to a spiritual leader a year later and opened up about how I had been diagnosed that year with depression, an anxiety disorder, and bipolar disorder. She said that whatever this entity was, it had probably latched onto me because I've been so depressed and done so with life. It made me an easy target for evil spirits. I didn't see the thing for 2 years, but this is where things get kind of wild. I had gotten severely depressed over those 2 years. I was having multiple panic attacks a day and could not take it anymore. I should mention that after being diagnosed, I was on medication only for 6 months after that. My parents weren't too keen on letting me stay on the drugs my whole life. Ultimately, got me to stop. But with that, my emotions got worse. So, when I was 22, I visited a psychiatrist, without letting my parents know, who ended up telling me that I was misdiagnosed. Turns out, I don't have bipolar disorder, but borderline personality disorder. I was quite happy with just the diagnosis because it finally made sense. I had mentioned the figures that I had seen a few times to her, and she had asked me to get the EEG done. It's basically something that checks for abnormal brain activity. Didn't think too much of it, and decided to get the test done. The results, in simple terms, showed abnormal brain activity coming from the front right side of my brain. I was surprised, but again, didn't think too much of it. The psych suggested I get an MRI scan done, so I broke the news to my now ex, and we got the scan done. And what do you know? I had a brain cyst of around 3 centimeters on the right side of my brain. Suffice to say, I completely broke down when I saw the results. I went back to my psych, who started me on treatment at this point. I had to involve my parents in the matter. They took me to a couple of neurologists who said the cyst can definitely cause hallucinations and personality disorders, but that it wasn't necessarily to operate on and could be dealt with the proper medications. Unfortunately for me, once I moved back in with my parents, they got me off the medication again, and I have now developed severe paranoia that leads me to leave my bedroom light on pretty much every night, especially in this creepy house, which is another story for another time. The silver lining here, though, is at least now I have an explanation and know that I'm not crazy.
It was the year 2018. My best friend and I were getting more adventurous as our senior year continued. We would stay out late smoking weed and walking around various neighborhoods or high-riding. 2 young, 18-year-old girls. My best friend Julia is about 5'5", brown hair, blue eyes. Then me being 5'9", blonde hair, blue eyes. Most would think we were absolutely stupid for doing some of the reckless things we did. Yet we did not care. We craved the adrenaline, and we were both a bit disturbed due to some trauma we experienced as individuals. Fear did not exist at the time, as we had been through enough scary situations to be numb to the idea of fear. Now, at the time it was close to the end of the school year, and honestly, our parents stopped paying attention to us most nights. I was home alone, and my best friend and I were left to do whatever we wanted most days and nights. That is when the idea of urban exploration became our new favorite thing to do. We explored all over our town in New Jersey and surrounding towns, although we could not find a building that was daring enough for us thrill seekers. After searching YouTube for a couple days, that is when I found it, the holy grail of abandoned buildings near us. Only 30 minutes from us into Pennsylvania was an old abandoned school that was home to delinquent children. After doing some personal research on the school, I came to find that the school was closed due to a fire that killed a student and teacher. Although after visiting the school a couple times, something told me several way more sinister things happened on the grounds of the school. There were about 25 buildings, so it took more than 6 times searching to really get the absolute full experience this school had to offer. On campus was a security guard who drove around in a blacked-out Jeep. He never would leave his car. Only once did he catch us, although he just told us to leave. Again, never leaving his car. I still wonder if he had the same feeling about the place as we did and that he found sanctuary never leaving his car. Since there were so many times we visited, I am only going to highlight the most terrifying moments we experienced. Of course, from least to most blood-curdling. To give you the ambience of what we were facing, I will tell you this. To get into the campus, you needed to cut through trees and bushes with thorns on them. Always wear pants when exploring. After you get through the brush, hopefully unscathed, you are greeted by several decaying buildings. The smell of mold and nature kind of all hit you at once. Absolutely everything there is overgrown and seriously falling apart. Graffiti is pretty much plastered everywhere. Besides the physical look, the gut-wrenching feeling you get when you walk foot on this property, that alone will make you want to turn back and never set foot there again. Something about this place seriously is wrong, and you feel as though you should not be there. Something I came to personally learn about this place is every time you come back, things seem to get more and more out of place and otherworldly. Walking into these buildings, most windows are boarded up, so you can only see using the small light on your phone. Other than that, it is pitch black. The first truly terrifying moment I had on this campus had to be finding the blood-chilling room, where it looked as though it was an old dentist office, or something medical. I am not sure why it was there, or what they really did there, but when I walked in I got this strange feeling of death. Scattered in the pitch-black room, all I could see was open syringes covering the floor, a dentist chair that had dried red substance, resembling blood all over it, and everything else in the room untouched. As my best friend and I explored this small, dark room, we began to hear footsteps coming from down the dark corridor. Trying to rationalize the noise, we automatically assumed it was the security guard and ran the opposite direction back out the small window we came from in the other room. Upon reaching outside, we hid behind some coverage and waited quite a bit of time. We did not hear the noise again, nor did anyone come out. The next time we came, we decided to try and find the building that contained an old game room in it. Since we explored most of the buildings, we figured out which one it most likely was. Searching the perimeter for it anyway, and checking doors we could not find a way in. Circling back, I found an old, dirty window which looked as if it opened to a dark, cement basement. Being the little badasses we were, I jumped through it almost immediately. Now, the first thing we saw as we walked out of the closet window was a wide-open basement. With further analysis, we realized just how scary this basement was. The only thing down here besides it being absolutely freezing in mid-May was the old worn fireplace. Written above the fireplace was something demonic, or like demon worshippers had written it. Several pentagrams were graffitied. Looking towards the middle of the floor was red paint of a pentagram, a very big smack dab in the middle of the floor. Candle wax was everywhere, and it was accompanied by a strange smell. With the sense of existential dread suffocating the room, we darted towards the steps at the back of the room. We did not step foot in that basement ever again. The second to last time visiting the campus, we decided to be even more bossy and explore at night. It was roughly 12 at night, maybe slightly later. And, again, it was simply just my best friend Julia, and I, besides it being dark. Approaching the school made my blood run cold. Everything in my body was telling me to run the other way, and to not step foot back at this campus. Yet again, I ignored my gut instinct, and we began our journey through the woods to make it into the campus. Tonight was different. I decided to actually document our journey, as if we were on Ghost Hunter, or some other paranormal show. The whole time I was recording, I would go back and forth from me to what I was seeing. As me and Julia began walking through the pitch black, using only her phone light, visibility was dim. We could see as much as 7 feet in front of us. The rest of this campus had been like it was not even there. Just utter blackness surrounded us. I was laughing and talking to my audience on my Instagram story, boasting about the trip as if it made me the coolest person ever to risk my life, just to see some buildings filled with asbestos, mold, and possibly homeless people. Just as I turned the camera to face Julia and sort of interviewed her about her current experience, is when I saw what made my heart stop and my jaw drop. I froze in the position I was in, just holding the camera, pointing in Julia's direction. As Julia looked past my camera, almost questioning why I got so quiet, she saw my face. The viewers at home could only see Julia's expression. It had said more to the people at home than either of us could explain. Seeing how absolutely horrified I was, and how my face had turned the lightest shade it could, she let out a scream and grabbed my arm, pulling me into a different direction. I felt as if I was no longer present, and adrenaline had taken over my body. My legs were moving, yet it felt like I was not controlling them. We jumped and hid behind a tree, as Julia pleaded with me to tell her what I had seen. For a couple minutes, I just sat there, trying to process what I had just seen. I did not want to believe anything scary and paranormal could be real. It felt like a true scary movie came to life. When I regained my ability to talk again, I told her exactly what I saw. When I tell you, you most likely will not believe me, for it is so utterly insane. It's almost laughable. That image will never leave my memory, for it is burned in forever. Standing right behind Julia, just in the shot of my camera, was a black large figure. With a closer look, I remember not believing what I saw, and becoming what felt like paralysis, as I was stuck staring at this figure, standing only 3 feet behind my best friend. A man on a large horse from what I could make out, no detail to him at all. Like he had literally been a shadow, just a blacked out figure. The worst part was his large, broad body seemed as if it had no head. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me, it absolutely was. I had heard stories of the Headless Horseman as a kid, yet I never expected to see anything like that in my walking hours of the day. After telling my best friend what I had seen, we hightailed it back to Jersey and decided to do some more research and see if anyone had any similar experiences or the same one. As we searched, I found countless stories that made my bones hurt about this place and what other urban explorers had lived. One in particular made me literally almost faint. To be brief, this guy who had been really into exploring found this place years back and decided, like us, he wanted to keep coming back and see everything the campus had to offer. He explained how every single time he came back, weirder and weirder things happened to him, which to my knowledge was exactly how I had felt. But what he said next made my soul sink into the floor. He explained the last time he decided to go was at night. He explained how in front of the red house, he had been chased out by a headless horseman. My stomach sank. I went right back to the live video I had taken and watched it back. The part in which Julia looks at my horrified face directly. In the background sat the old decaying red house, half burnt down. My jaw dropped. We did not visit this place for a couple weeks. I would love to say I learned my lesson, and this is the end of the story. I would be lying. After a couple weeks had passed, our urge to visit the campus grew to an insane level, almost as if something was pulling us back, like we had strings attached to our bodies. Being the reckless kids we were, we decided 12 was not scary enough. Let's go at the devil's hour. 3 a.m. Now, as we walk towards the woods, we need to cut through a thick fog that appears out of nowhere. If you think that was not enough to scare us away, you were right. I led the pack and proceeded towards a gap in the trees. As I am about 10 feet ahead of my 2 friends, I noticed some movement coming from the trees. We were not alone. Thinking who else may be out at 3 a.m, I started shifting backwards, alerting my friends as I slowly backpedaled. Just as my friends looked in my direction, a deer came running right towards us. Right before it reached me, it stopped dead in its tracks, 2 feet away. This was like no deer I had ever seen. Again, I felt myself with short-term paralysis, as I felt like I was staring directly into the devil's eyes. The mist completely surrounds the deer like an animal, to the point I could not even see its feet. That's when I noticed its peculiar eyes glowing a weird yellow or red color. None of this seemed normal. That's when I noticed my friends booking it towards the street. Not wanting to be alone with this creature, I ran as fast as I could and eventually caught up with them. None of us wanted to admit how truly spooked we were, so we decided to try and find another entrance. Walking down the side road that followed next to the campus, we began to keep walking straight, occasionally looking for another opening. We then decided that at the end of the road, the campus had a church that sat on an open field. Thinking it was the safest way in, we kept walking down this road at 3:30, with absolutely no street lights. It felt like we had been walking forever, and small talk was at the minimum due to all of us low-key being scared shitless. That is when we heard it. We were almost to the church. It was about a quarter mile away from us. The sound of a chainsaw rang in all of our ears, sending chills down our spine. A chainsaw has a very distinct sound, yet in order to keep them faithful to the mission, I said, "Hey, maybe it's just a generator." Assuming they agreed with me, I proceeded walking towards the strange noise. Suddenly, the sounds of speeding footsteps broke my concentration. Only they were headed away from me rather than towards me. This is when the fear really hit me. My friends were so far away from me, panic began to set in. I was only brave if I had my friends there, easing my anxiety. The second I noticed them running, my heart sunk. The chainsaw grew louder and more aggressive. I'm downright sweating at this point. Finally, instinct kicks in, and I bolt towards my friends, somehow catching up with them immediately. We all decided to go home, since it felt like the campus was doing everything in its power to keep us out. To this day, I'm not sure what was lurking past those trees, but I am not willing to ever go back to find out. Just remember, if you decide to go urban exploring, never go alone, and always follow your gut, for you never know what your animal instincts could be protecting you from.
I've always been very intrigued by the paranormal, and absolutely love horror movies, but had never really experienced something personally until about 7 years ago. I was 19 at the time, now almost 26. My boyfriend and I live together here in Wyoming, where I'm from, but he is not from here. This must have been Thanksgiving 2013 or 2014. My boyfriend wanted to go back home south to be with his family for the holiday. I was a little upset that he would not be spending the holiday with me, but knew he had not been home in a while, so was happy he would be able to be back home with his family. He planned on staying for only about a week, but spoiler alert, he never came back. Once he got there, I just had a feeling of constant dread and sadness. He barely called, would barely text, and him having cheating in the past, my thoughts were constantly consumed with who he was spending his time with. Anyway, that's slightly irrelevant. A couple months go by, and he's still there. Then, one morning, I get a call from his mom. It took me by surprise as I'd only spoke with her maybe 2 times before when him and I were living together. However, I knew if she was calling me, it could not be good news. It wasn't, but it was at the same time. She called to tell me that he had gotten in with the wrong crowd and had been doing some pretty serious drugs. He apparently had a complete meltdown, and something had happened with the group of friends that led him to being targeted. She did not go into too much detail about that. She then said that she had sent him to live with a relative up north. So that was the bad news. The good news was that she told me how he was super upset because he promised me we'd be together for Valentine's Day, which at this point was a little less than a month away. So, she explained to me how she'd offer to pay for half of my plane ticket to go see him, so we could spend it together. However, it kept urging me that I should wait, and that he wasn't himself. Obviously, I didn't care. I mean, how bad could it be? Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I'm boarding my plane to fly to the northeast part of the US, where I had never been before. I felt on top of my world. Not only would I finally be seeing my boyfriend for the first time since Thanksgiving, but I had never been to this part of the country before, and experiencing it for the first time with him, it made me feel like this would be one of the best times of my life. I was so wrong. Immediately upon arriving at the hotel he was staying at, I got a bad feeling in my stomach, which only got worse when he opened the door. I could tell he wasn't him, and the moment he opened the door, he was excited to see me, but did not give me the welcome at all that I imagined. He hugged me, kissed my forehead, said he was glad I was here, then just quietly and slowly walked back to the bed and lied down. He seemed so blah, sad, just not his normal goofy, giddy self. Now, I knew his mom told me something had happened to him, so I correlated his now behavior with anybody would be if something traumatic had happened. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not the best at comforting people. It's just not my thing, and always makes me feel awkward. I always just assume there's absolutely nothing I could say or do to make somebody feel better when they're down like that. But I was going to try my hardest to bring him back to who he was and be there for him. I laid down and cuddled up to him. Told him he could tell me about it if he wanted to, but if not, I would not push it. We laid there, cuddled, and had small talk. Mostly about my trip there and our puppy that I'd bought him for Christmas. It was then that he started interrupting me. But not to chime in about what I was telling him, but to talk to someone that was in the corner of our hotel room, which obviously it was just us. I don't even remember what he'd say, but it'd be the most random things that did not pertain to my topic at all. I'd lift my head up off his chest. Huh? And he'd just chuckle and say, nothing. So at this point, I was pretty confused and now really worried about him. All I could think about was his mom urging me to wait. This happened about 2 or 3 times before I finally said, "Well, are you hungry? I'm starving." He said sure, and that there was a restaurant just right across the street from our hotel. We get to the restaurant, sit down, I order. He tells the waiter he's not hungry. My food comes, and as I'm eating, he apologized for being so blah. Told me how happy he is that I'm there and told me he'd take me to get my nails done tomorrow and do something fun. He was a little bit better at dinner, so that made me feel much more at ease. We walked back to our hotel. It's almost 10 now, so I wasn't mad when he suggested putting on a movie and relaxing. As we're laying there, I started to kiss him and be a little touchy. I hadn't seen my man in almost 3 months. Can you blame me? That was when he grabbed my hand and firmly told me no. That he had decided he didn't want to do that again until marriage. That was really odd to me because we had a very healthy sexual relationship before. I thought he was kidding, so I laughed and tried to proceed. He grabs my hand again and said he was serious. I was a little irritated because I really wanted to show him how much I missed him. But I stopped and we started engaging in small talk again, which is when he proposed to me. But not like actually proposed. He asked me if I'd marry him, but he didn't get on one knee, didn't have a ring or anything. He was serious too. This excited me, and of course I said yes. We decided to go on going to a jewelry store in the morning to pick out a ring. He then got up and got his notebook out of his bag, and we spent the next hour or so writing down wedding plans before falling asleep. All right. I'm getting to the point of the story that you're all here for. I promise much more happens than him just talking to himself. I woke up the next morning feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. Looked over at him and got butterflies. He actually wants to spend his life with me. I kissed him and he woke up. We hung out for a bit and decided to go get some breakfast. I really thought and hoped that maybe today he'd be back to himself. At first, he seemed a lot better, but still kind of the same. We went to the local Denny's and got some breakfast, then went over to the mall. This is where it started getting more downhill. We're walking in the mall hand in hand, smiling and pointing at things in windows at stores, where he then starts talking to himself again. And at first I say, "What?" But then after looking up at him, noticed he wasn't looking at me, just right in front of him. Didn't even acknowledge that I'd asked what. I say he was talking to himself because he obviously wasn't talking to me or anybody else. But it was like he was having a straight-up conversation with somebody. Again, I can't quite remember everything he was saying. I do remember him just laughing and replying, "Haha, yeah, I know, right? It's wild." Or, no, trust me, we won't do that." Just things like that were weird. I let this go on for at least a complete circle around the whole mall, just pretending to look at store windows while my mind was racing, wondering not only why he was going to do this, but what was going on. What do I even say? We're walking up on a K Jewelers, so I figured this was my time to say something. I interrupted his conversation with, "Well, should we look at rings?" making a head gesture towards the jewelry store. He snapped out of it, looked over and smiled. We picked out a ring, got the credit application, and it was almost a done deal, when he stopped and asked if we could take the night to think about it. I agreed. It was a big decision to make. We had not even told our friends and family yet. And then, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, and it's clear you're not in the right headspace. We get back to the room, and he told me he was going to go take a shower, and asked if I'd join him. This surprised me and excited me at the same time, since the previous night when I was being so touchy, he stopped me. So I told him of course. This ended up being the most awkward shower I'm sure I will ever take. He's behind me putting soap on my back. I could feel that he was enjoying the shower, if you know what I mean. So this gave me a little hope that maybe he'd disregard the whole celibacy thing he mentioned the previous night. Wrong. Just as I was about to reach behind me and start touching, I stopped. Right as he says, "I know, she's absolutely beautiful, right?" And he starts conversing with himself again. So I say it was an awkward shower because it basically consisted of him talking to somebody else about me. They were talking about my body in depth and how beautiful I was. So I'm standing there wondering if I should be saying thank you. I mean, technically they are compliments, but on the other hand, he's talking about it as if I wasn't there. I don't even remember if I said anything. I think I just stared at the wall and avoided eye contact with him, since every time I look at him, he'd be completely engaged with something else in the corner of the shower. Out of my peripheral, I'd see him look at parts of my body, and the weird compliment conversation would start back up. The shower finally ended, and I felt sad. All I wanted to do was cry and go to sleep. But this is where things took a much deeper turn. The part of this whole trip that I'll never be able to explain. We're both lying in bed, naked. He's still talking to himself, or whoever he's talking to, when out of nowhere, he jumps up out of bed so fast it startled me, as if something had bit him or something. And before I could even get the words, "What's wrong?" out of my mouth, he screams at me, "Are you the devil?" I looked at him with wide eyes, not even knowing what to say, and before I could say anything again, "Are you the devil?" Now I'm freaking out at this point, on the inside. On the outside, I literally do nothing but stare. So I just say as calmly as I can, "No, why would you think—" "Stop lying to me, devil. You think you're fooling me. I will not let you do this." I lay there and tears began to fill my eyes. I just watched as he started grabbing any loose object he could find in the room and setting them on top of me in the bed, like he was trying to hold me down or something. I mean, he grabbed pens, notebooks, both our luggage, clothes, even the phone and nightstand, just on top of me in the bed, all while he's still screaming and asking if I'm the devil who sent me. And at some point during all of this, I discreetly grabbed my phone and called his mom. I didn't put it up to my ear. I just wanted her to hear what was going on. I could hear her freaking out, praying, saying she'd call her brother. I'm just laying there with all these objects on me, crying my eyes out, hoping this was a bad dream. I don't think it could get any worse, but it did. He then gets a cup of water from the bathroom. When he came back, I poop you not, he literally began performing an exorcism on me. I've never seen an actual exorcism, but I have seen plenty of horror movies. The man really started speaking another language, throwing water on me, putting a cross up to my forehead. He'd violently grab my arms and ask why the water wasn't burning. I'd scream every time he'd come close to examine my body for burns. I was terrified. I didn't know what would be coming next. I've never in my life seen eyes so black. I couldn't even see the whites of his eyes. They were completely black. The most scary thing of all in the whole situation, apart from his black eyes, was him speaking another language. I knew he didn't know any other language, and whatever he was speaking, Latin maybe, he was speaking it as if it was his first. I thought for sure somebody in the hotel has called the front desk by now. I had not screamed at the top of my lungs, but loud enough to where people staying at least 2 or 3 rooms over would have heard. And finally, there's a knock at the door. The amount of relief I felt in my body is unexplainable. He stops the exorcism right away, looking over at the door, and I get a little scared, and again he yells, "Who did you send?" But then we hear, "Cameron, it's me." "Uncle Mike?" he says calmly. I changed the names just in case, you know. He walks over to the door, calmly, opens the door, and thank God his uncle is finally here. His mom had told me she was calling him, but it felt like hours since I'd heard her say that. I almost thought I heard wrong. He invites his uncle in the room, and once walking far enough to see the bed on the other side of the bathroom wall, has a look that I can only explain as mortified. I make eye contact and just stare at each other for probably a good 10 seconds. He walks over to the bed, starts taking off all the random objects, and the nightstand being the first. Cameron tries to stop him, explaining that I'm the devil and he's not done saving his fiancée yet. His uncle says something random along the lines of, "I know, but what needs to be done cannot be done here. We need to change locations." Cameron surprisingly agrees and lets his uncle continue taking off all the objects. Once I have the blankets left on me, which are drenched in certain spots from the water being thrown at me, but soaked from my hands grasping a certain spot, his uncle says, "Go ahead, put some clothes on." Even though I had blankets on me, it was clear at the least bit I wasn't wearing a shirt. My shoulders and arms had been exposed the whole time, and my hair was in a bun. I slowly got up and grabbed clothes. Uncle Mike walked away and led Cameron further to the other side of the room by the window. It was completely silent. Normally, I'd feel uncomfortable because I was naked. I had never met Cameron's uncle before in my life. But the feeling of relief was so strong that the feeling of being uncomfortable or feeling awkward was not at all present. I remember grabbing a hoodie and sweatpants. As I was putting my shoes on his uncle, he says, "Go out to the parking lot and wait in the red truck. We'll be out shortly." As I'm about to walk out the door, I hear, "Uncle Mike, we can't let her leave. That's not her, it's the devil." I get to the lobby, walk by the front desk, where I'm happily greeted by the man working behind it. He had no idea. Our room was on the first floor. Immediately, upon taking a right past the front desk, is a hallway where the room starts. We are maybe 6 rooms down. He had no idea. I walked out the main doors. I did not even smile back at the employee. I just stared at him as I kept walking. The red truck stuck out like a sore thumb. As I think back and picture this as it's almost like it was the only truck in the parking lot. I get in the passenger side, freezing. I had not grabbed my coat, and it's February in the northern United States. I call his mom, who has called at least 10 times. She answers after the first ring. I start sobbing as I tell her what happened. His uncle's truck wasn't parked right in front of the double automatic doors, like if you were in a booking room, but right on the other side, where, if I were to turn the headlights on, the headlights would shine right through the front doors into the lobby. To the right of the doors, I barely see the employee at the front desk. I continue telling his mom about what happened when I see Cameron running into the lobby, his uncle right behind him. They startle the man behind the front desk. I could see Cameron is upset and visibly yelling. His uncle, now with a worried look on his face, doing the known hand gesture of calm down. And the employee is now frantic and on the phone. I knew he was calling the police. This worries his mom and I because, well, Cameron is African American. This was right before the Black Lives Matter movement. Within what seems like seconds, I see cherries and berries. Lots. About 4 cop cars pull up to the entrance right as I see Cameron throwing a little table that had been next to one of the lobby couches. I got out of the truck to see better because one of the cop cars was now blocking my view. Just in time to see him swing at one of the officers and book it down the hall. I then see the side door of the hotel swing open and Cameron taking off. He ran right by me, did not even look at me. One officer takes off 1 foot behind him, while the rest get in their vehicles. His uncle walks out the automatic doors while I'm looking in the direction that my fiancé ran. He hugs me, tells me to get in the truck. I don't remember what we talked about, if we even talked at all, but he got word that Cameron had been detained and was taken to the hospital. We drove there, but by the time we arrived, he had been heavily sedated. His uncle took me to breakfast. It was around 4 a.m. at this point. To Denny's, where just a little less than 24 hours before Cameron and I were holding hands, talking about the wedding. His uncle explained to me how this wasn't his nephew. He'd never seen him like that. I told him everything that had happened, thanked him for showing up and taking me back to the hotel. It was officially Valentine's Day. I had to go back to that room by myself. His uncle offered his home to me, but I declined. I wanted to be alone, as much as I didn't want to be alone. But I wanted Cameron, the Cameron I loved. I walked back into the room that was completely trashed, and just lay there for a few hours, reliving everything that had gone down just a few hours prior. Around 7 a.m., I called a cab to the hospital, but Cameron was no longer there and was in jail. I went back to the room where I spent the next 3 days alone, crying. I arrived back in Wyoming to my best friend / roommate excited to hear all about my trip. But upon seeing my face, she knew something had happened. We sat on the couch, and I just laid into her. She held me while I cried and told her everything that had happened. A week later, Cameron called me. I had kept in contact with his mother, who was trying to get him out of jail since I left. I was so excited to see his name pop up on my phone, and I could not wait to talk to him. He called to break up with me. I was still going to marry him, even after all of that. I was devastated. You know the scene in one of the Twilight movies where Edward breaks up with Bella, and she's a complete zombie, and totally depressed for months? That was exactly me. Almost 7 years later, I still have not seen Cameron. He never came back to Wyoming. The last time I saw him was when he flew by me, running from the cops. We talk every now and then. We actually just checked on each other recently because of this pandemic. We've not discussed what happened at all, ever. According to his mom, who I've not spoken to since about a month after the incident, he doesn't remember anything, and asked if I not tell him, so I have not. I recently told this story to a friend after saying my ex-fiancé in conversation, and they had no idea I was ever engaged. Lately, I've had this burning urge to ask Cameron about it. I'm dying to hear his side. Personally, I believe Cameron was possessed. His mom always blamed it on the drugs, but I don't know if drugs make somebody fluent in another language like that. And his eyes went black. Whatever caused it was 100% demonic.